Book 8, The Last Day, Chapter 5, The 34th Day of Planting, A Very Long Day, Part 9 of 12. Her chest seized in terror, making it nearly impossible for Mari to breathe. She was hiding in the alcove of the large oak doors, the tall white columns in front of her about 10 paces. The sun, hanging low above the mountains, cast deep shadows all around her, and she cowered in the darkest one. On the other side of the columns were the stairs, and then the officers. It was strange to see so many men in blue uniforms after so many years away from the army. And the blue continued beyond them, filling the fields and coming in as a massive pack, ever closer to the temple. 70,000 against 1. Not good odds. Her hands shook, her mouth was dry, her palms were wet, her knees crackled as they trembled, and she was sure that at any moment she would collapse. Between the columns she could make out the profile of Lemuel on his horse, his right arm limp by his side, and his blond hair going gray. He had arrived first with some mounted men and officers on foot. As soon as he reached the lane which ran before the temple, he turned to watch the progress of the soldiers. Mari had assumed he'd dismount and march up the stairs, but he seemed to be waiting for the right moment to make his grand approach. His face was hardened and no longer as handsome as she remembered when he was a young man. Beside him sat another mounted man whose face she couldn't make out before he, too, turned his back to the temple. He was wearing an absurd light blue silk outfit that looked more appropriate as bed clothing for a king, and was covered with an outrageous purple cloak, edged in gold, that would have been better as curtains in the mansion. Maybe that's where he got them. Mari almost smiled at the thought. She searched the other profiles and backs of heads standing near Thorn and the Curtain Man, trying to see if she could recognize Poe among them. There was a gray-haired man near the Curtain Man that Mari first dismissed, then considered that Poe would have gray hair by now. She still thought of him as the 9-year-old boy, sitting on her front porch wearing silk shirts and asking questions about Tarab. She wondered if he remembered those days, as she frequently did. If he would just turn around, glance at the temple or the mountain behind, she might be able to glimpse the Poe Healy she once knew. But he didn't move, except to put a steadying hand on the Curtain Man's leg, as if worried he'd jump off the horse and make a run for it. Mari bit her lip and wrung her hands in worry. She certainly couldn't make a run for it, trapped now by the line of officers before her, the stone edifice behind her. Let's just get this over with, she thought, whatever this may be. It was by far the largest crowd she had ever had to perform for, and she didn't have the slightest idea what would happen or what she would say. She was never this unprepared for anything. She kept praying for inspiration and kept getting the feeling that the right words would come at the right moment. Now she just had to wait for that moment. Trying to calm herself, she took deep breaths, thinking that Boscos would tell her slower, slower, slower. The sound of thousands of men just a stone's thrown away echoed in the covered stone portico, reverberating deafeningly in her tiny alcove, a horrible combination of metal, marching, and voices, punctuated by shouts and calls of officers. Suddenly a horn blasted 3 times in front of the steps, and Mari nearly jumped out of her skin as it bounced around the portico. Then she heard Lemuel's voice. She would have recognized him anywhere. "Our great guide has some words for you all," Thorn bellowed. "Guide?" Mari mouthed. She peered over to see the silk Curtain Man getting off his horse, and she rolled her eyes. The world's guide wears silk. For half a moment she wished Shem was there to see this. Suddenly her chest burned. The man began to climb up the stairs, and Mari knew this was her moment. She was to confront the guide, because in her mind she clearly saw herself doing it. He was up half the stairs, now at the top. He turned and held up his hands dramatically, waiting for silence. Mari stepped out of her shadowy alcove, not knowing what was going to happen, but feeling as if she were following some scene in a play that she'd always known but didn't remember until the moment she performed it. She headed straight for the blue silk, and her mouth dropped open in astonishment as she recognized the guide. She stopped by his side. He glanced down at her, startled to realize he wasn't alone, and then he went deathly pale. Mari put her hands on her hips. "Leonard Croup, what in the world have they done to you?" Leonard froze. Mari knew he recognized her. There was no possible way he could be wearing such an expression of horror and dismay if he didn't. "Oh, Crete," he whispered. "Oh, Crete, oh, Crete." He started to back up toward the southern end of the open portico, his hands still upraised. Mari felt confidence and power that filled her head to toe as she walked toward him at the same rate. "Lemuel did this to you, didn't he? Oh, Leonard, you were always such a follower." "Leonard!" Thorne shouted, a tinge of worry in his tone to see his guide behaving so oddly when he was supposed to be delivering some motivational speech that Mari would bet Lemuel had written for him. "What's going on?" He glared at the little old woman, scaring Leonard to the edge of the portico. Leonard's eyes shot over to Thorne, as if pleading for deliverance from a stalking mountain lion, and he continued to take slow, jerky steps backward. "No, no, Leonard, look at me," Mari said in her best teacher tone. "Stop this ridiculous thing you're doing. He's using you, Leonard, just like he did when you were a boy. He's always used you." Another voice rang out. "Leonard, stop, behind you!" But Leonard only stared at Mrs. Shin, the woman who had been his teacher for 2 years, who criticized his ideas one minute, then winked her apologies the next. The teacher he complained about to Captain Thorne, who wrote down what she taught and sent it to Chairman Mal and the administrators, who then came to arrest her for sedition against Ida Mia. Mari could see their shared history flash in his eyes, and the man was reduced to cowering like a terrified child. He took a few more steps backward. She took a few more steps toward him. "Leonard, stop. Come now." He was completely white with terror. "You're dead," he finally said, as if trying to reassure himself. "You're dead, you're dead, you're dead." He continued to back up. "I didn't know he was sending letters, that he wrote down what I complained about. You're already dead." His hands were still outstretched and beginning to tremble. "No, I'm not. Stop, Leonard. Stop walking. Leonard!" Mari cried out and reached for him, but she was too late. He'd gone too far. Over the side of the portico, his arms still up in shock, not realizing that he was falling, not noticing anything but his teacher from so many years ago. Miserably, her face was the last thing he saw as he fell backward onto the stones below and hit with a sickening thud. Mari slapped her hand over her mouth and cautiously peered over the edge. Several soldiers rushed to his aid. By his unnatural position on the jagged rock, Mari already knew what they would shout. "He's dead! His neck's broke!" Mari gulped and twisted to the bulk of the army. They were gasping in shock and crying out in dismay. Obviously, the poor gullible man meant something to them. Many were already backing away, as if dreading the same evil was about to happen to them. At the far edges of the crowd, Mari could make out soldiers running. It was happening. Thorne dismounted and rushed over to see Leonard for himself, as did the gray-haired man who had previously been holding on to him. He looked up at Mari. "Poe!" She nearly cried out his name, but was too overwhelmed to do anything but stare. Poe stared back at her, a flurry of emotions racing across his face, and his chest began to heave. But he didn't get a chance to say anything either, because Thorne's head snapped up, his eyes on fire. "Who the slag are you?" he demanded. This was it. She knew it, and she also knew the words she needed to say. Mari turned to face her biggest audience ever. In as loud a voice as she could muster, she shouted, My name is Mari Pado Shin, and because you have invaded Salem, all of you will die, just like Leonard Croup." The effect was extraordinary. She had barely proclaimed her identity when the carefully formed lines began to dissolve. The sea of blue churned and tossed as men ran in a panic. She had to finish the speech that was rapidly forming in her mind before her audience was thoroughly undone, or rather, so she could further undo them. "Lemuel Thorne has lied to you all these years. I never died in the forest, nor did my family or the colonel. We escaped here to Salem. Perrin Shin built those towers flying the black banners, and he devised a way to keep our people safe until the last day. Know this, it is coming, the last day. John Offra has been warning you, and he's right. Stop this now. You cannot win." Thorne was fighting through the crowd of soldiers, rushing to see the guide's body, who were rushing to get past the temple, who were rushing around just to rush around in a frenzy. He tried to get to the stairs, but kept getting pushed back and shoved to the side. He yelled, "She lies! She lies!" as he struggled to the stairs. But the damage was done. Mari gazed out over the vast field and did her best estimating. Hundreds, thousands, now tens of thousands, yes, 1/3, it had to be, was running away in terror of the death of their guide and the name of the one who caused it, even though she hadn't even touched poor Leonard. That probably made it even worse. The remaining soldiers looked hysterically around, trying to figure out what to do next in the swirling chaos. Mari's chest burned in gratitude, relief, and even a touch of pride. It was done. She, the aged, terrifying 1/3 of the army. Suddenly, her view was filled with Lemuel Thorne running up the stairs. He'd broken through his soldiers and now strode straight for her. Mari stepped back in alarm. "Today, my darling daughter, the world has come to get you." "Slagging Crete!" Lemuel hissed in a low voice, but Mari could hear him plainly over the mayhem caused by the retreating soldiers. "It is you." She swallowed hard and retreated backward until she bumped into the cold stone of the temple wall. Soldiers, large, beefy men, likely Thorne's faithful guard, followed him up the stairs and filled the portico, cutting off any possibility of escape. She was trapped. "Oh, I've been waiting for this for a very long time," Lemuel said, with a thin, cruel smile on his lips. Perrin was too blinded by love to do what he should have done all those years ago. He stalked toward her as Mari pressed her back against the stone wall. She couldn't think of anything to do, paralyzed by fear. Lemuel drew his sword. Mari couldn't even gasp. "But today, I will right a great many wrongs. Mari Pado Shin, this is your last day." The only man faster with the blade was Perrin, but only just. Lemuel raised his left arm and thrust in the sword. Mari couldn't move or scream. Her chest burned again, but this time with searing pain that took away all of her strength. The last thing she saw was Lemuel's sneer. Then everything grew dark, and the pain stopped. Shem fell to his knees, his mouth hanging open, his hands gripping his head in agony. "No!" he cried, pulling out clumps of hair. None of the soldiers running past him in a panic noticed. They didn't even realize they were running into the trees. They were just running to get away from the woman who was supposed to be dead, but who killed the guide without even touching him. Shem didn't notice them either. He just stared, dumbfounded, as her body fell. It happened so fast he didn't know what to do to prevent it. He hadn't even mounted on Clark 14, but stood rooted to the ground as if being held back, his mind wiped clean of any wild ideas of rescue he had entertained only moments before. He remained there, useless and clueless. But now there was no doubt in his mind. Mari was gone, and by Lemuel's hand, because Shem delivered her there. The deliverer. He collapsed to the ground. "Perrin," he gasped in sobs. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Versa had initially been watching with fascination. First that ridiculous guide fell and everyone started running. It was the prophecy. 1/3 of the soldiers were running. Many others were completely stunned. She did it. Mari Pedoshin, the aged, did it. Defeated 1/3 of the army of Idumea. Versa leaped to her feet and raised her hands to cheer until she saw the general striding up the stairs. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare do it, General!" She rushed to the edge of the trees and held on to them as she watched him draw his sword. "Oh, no, 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 no." The last one came out as a whimper. "No." Up on the hillside, young Per fought vainly to free himself from the tree. The moment he saw the small body come out of hiding on the portico and walk resolutely up to Guide Lannard, he knew exactly who it was and what was going to happen. He lunged and clawed and flailed and even dug frantically at the roots, but the tree held securely. There was nothing he could do to save her. Nothing but thrash against his confines and watch as Thorn walked up those stairs and pulled out his sword. Young Per was gasping in desperation as he saw Thorn's arm rise. There was nothing, absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. All he could do was scream and hope she heard him. "Mugga!" It wasn't so bad. Pain, then it was over. Just like that. Mari suspected that even if the pain had lasted much longer, or had been more excruciating, right now it wouldn't have mattered, not one bit. Just like childbirth. Nothing can compare to the agony of it, nor to the elation that follows it. All had gone dark, but now it was growing light, so bright and so quickly it took her breath away. Immediately she knew that wasn't correct. She had no breath to take away, but that was the sensation. Then she considered maybe it never was her breath or her heart fluttering that she felt, but the responses of her soul that affected her body. Everything continued to grow brighter and warmer until suddenly she was engulfed with joy, pure joy. "Oh, well done, my fantastic daughter!" There he stood in brilliant white, smiling broadly with his arms outstretched. She would have recognized him anywhere. "Father!" she cried, and rushed into his arms. There were no tears to shed because she had no tears, yet the emotion of sobbing for joy remained. The feel of his soul against hers wasn't quite the same as physical bodies, but it was still a wonderful sensation. She was a teenager again, wrapped up in her father's protection, and she closed her eyes in bliss. Reality filled her. Real reality, not the vague feelings of, "this is what I perceive as real," that plagued those limited by their minds and bodies, but a reality of depth, of breadth, of, "this is how things truly are." She was home. She'd experienced that sense before, when they came to Salem, and she realized Edge wasn't home, but just a place where she lived for 47 years. But now the thoughts of her physical life felt as slim and shallow as her existence in Edge had seemed, because now she was truly home. This was an old place, no, an ancient place, yet vibrant and new and growing and timeless. And so was she. Her mind erupted, rapidly filling to overflowing with so much knowledge and understanding of everything she used to know, as if her brain used to be covered by a veil which had just slipped off. She had been permitted to forget her ancient existence for 74 years. That was part of her test. What would her heart choose when her mind could no longer remember what she knew? But while she didn't feel as gray and frail as the body she left, her spirit was eons old, timeless beyond time. How did she tolerate existing in such a rapidly aging and decaying body for so long? When she left it, all she took were experiences and memories. And yet that was everything. Already she missed it, her body's form and abilities, but it would resuscitate again, so that it too would become as ageless and timeless as her. She squeezed her father, feeling as if the last 60 years of separation were only 60 minutes, and was nearly overcome by the sense of belonging, of returning. She didn't know how much she had wanted to be here until she finally came back. But it wasn't back, so to speak. It was forward. Same place, but a new and improved Mari coming home, as if she'd been gone on a sleep-away school break for a week and had just returned. That's how brief her 74 years in the world had seemed, merely a week. Her perspective was shifting, straightening itself to this real reality. She began to recognize that so many things in her life that had seemed important were not. And then again, so many things that had felt important were, far more than she anticipated. And best of all, for most of her life, she had gotten the distinction correct. She had passed the test. "You did it, Mari! You did it at the temple! Fantastic! I'm so proud of you!" Cephas Paedo shouted. "You saw me?" she whispered into his ear, still not wanting to let go of her father. He felt the same way. "Of course I did. We all did. You were never alone at the temple, Mari. We've been waiting for this moment for years. There were more with you, cheering you on, than there were soldiers." She opened her eyes and saw someone bouncing in excitement behind her father. She was young, also wore all white, and had brown hair with curls. Mari laughed. There was only one person she would release her father for. "Mother!" Her father gently pushed her toward her mother. Heisemum caught her in a big embrace. "I've missed you, Mari!" she cried. "I kept making your recipes!" Mari yelled cheerfully. "I know!" Heisemum yelled back, still hugging her daughter. "You actually learned something from me!" Mari heard her father laugh and turned back to look at him properly. She'd forgotten how handsome he was. Then again, she really didn't remember such a young version of him. He might have been about 20 years old. In him she saw so much of Paedo and her grandsons. He came over and put his arms around his wife and daughter. "Been waiting so long to do this," he sighed in satisfaction as he squeezed. "Worth the wait." "And how long are you going to do that, Cephas?" A deep but happy voice rumbled. "Because there's a line forming, you know." Mari knew that voice. She twisted and saw another handsome young man in white grinning at her. Next to him stood a beautiful young woman, with her hands clasped together in anticipation. "Ralph! Joriana!" Cephas released her, and she rushed to them. They caught her at the same time. "Mari, you're the greatest soldier ever," Ralph said with a chuckle. "I never saw anyone else make more than 20,000 soldiers run in terror." "Only the most aggravating woman in the world could have done that," Joriana said, hugging her. "I knew you had to be that way for some reason." Mari laughed and kissed them both on the cheeks. "As you said, Ralph," interrupted another merry voice, "there's a line forming to embrace the most dangerous woman in the world." Mari looked past her in-laws to see another favorite couple beaming at her. It was too good, just too much. But of course, that's what paradise was. "Tabit! Hogel!" She ran to yet another 2 sets of waiting arms and laughed in joy, as first Hogel Denzil kissed her cheek, then Tabit Denzil. They were both young and radiant and dressed in white, like everyone else there. "You!" She pointed at Hogel and grinned. "You were the one who said I was the most dangerous woman. Did you know, then, how this would go?" "No, I didn't," Hogel laughed. "And I'm glad I didn't, because I would have been tempted to tell you. I just knew you'd do something great and terrifying, And you did. Today. Her attention was captured by something beyond them. More people grinning and waving in welcome. Hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. And she knew them. All of them. Neighbors, friends, distant relatives, people from Salem, people from Edge, people she never shared a life with on the world, but knew intimately from long, long before. Her mind opened further, with millions of more faces and ideas suddenly remembered. So much was back, and none of it was overwhelming. It should have been, she considered later, such a massive comprehension. But it settled so easily onto her mind, as if it always belonged there, filling her soul with knowledge, power, and joy, pure joy. Then she saw a face she didn't expect to see. She blinked, then blinked again. Calla? Calla? Calla! Calla, younger and sweeter than Mari remembered, walked over to her with her arms open. Mari released the Denzels and took Calla instead. Why are you here? Oh, no. Calla smiled sadly. Oh, yes. I got to see my Sergeant Major in action, Mari, and he was wonderful, amazing. So what happened? 2 bowmen, both of them terrified as Shem came to destroy them. They released their arrows, and they both hit me. Mari realized that even in this elevated state, she could still be surprised. That's impossible, Calla suggested. Yes, it was. Those arrows were guided. It was supposed to be my last day, too. Shem doesn't know. Oh, Calla, first me, then you. Actually, the other way around, she said. He's going to need a lot of help soon. When the time is right, will you help me reach him? Of course. Mari gripped her best friend's arm. We should go now. You don't have to, not yet, Cephas told her. Nothing more is happening in the world while we are here. We have the ability to step out of their time. Most of us stay in their time to lend assistance and feel the moments with them as they experience them, so we can help them. But for special occasions, such as a welcoming home, we can suspend it. No time has passed in the world since you've come back to us. Calla, as well as her father, and many other ancestors trying to help those at the ancient temple site have, according to our descendants' reckoning, not even left them. They will be able to return to them without missing a single heartbeat of theirs. Mari hugged Calla. What is this going to do to Shem? It's his final trial, Mari, Calla said, her voice trembling, and we'll need to help him. I know who could, Mari said, searching over the familiar faces. She didn't see him. That struck her almost like a slap across the physical face she no longer had. There was one person missing, the most important person to her. Why didn't she see him? Mari, Cephas said gently, I know who you're looking for. Why isn't he here? She whispered, thinking she should be worried about his absence, but instead felt such peace that her physical mind would have been perplexed. I wanted him to be here. Hogel smiled. Don't you remember what you made him promise? To never leave young Pear. And he's been very faithful to that promise. Until today, I was his constant companion, Hogel told her. As he stayed with young Pear, I stayed right next to him. But after my company for so long... Hogel rolled his eyes so dramatically Mari couldn't help but giggle at the familiarity of it. I think he's ready for a new companion. He waggled his eyebrows. Mari turned to her father. How do I find him? Whatever you think of, you'll be to next in an instant, Cephas said. And I can come right back? We're all together all the time. You'll understand soon. It's not hard. The only thing here that's hard is watching our descendants suffer, Cephas said somberly. But that's why we're here, to bring them comfort and nudge them in the right directions. Like you always nudged me, Mari said. Cephas smiled. Exactly. Someone's going to need a lot of that in the next little while. Just think of me and I'll be there if you need me or have any questions. Soon you'll understand everything." He gave her another kiss. Suddenly Mari was somewhere else, but not where she expected to be. The brilliant whiteness of her surroundings was gone, but the warmth remained. Below her was her body, motionless on the wide stone portico at the temple. She knew she needed this last look to grasp what had occurred, although her mind felt clearer and stronger than ever. Her lifeless body didn't strike her as tragic. Quite the contrary. She felt light and happy as she looked at the worn-out shell that had served her and now was ready for a rest. She smiled at it. "Oh dear, looks like that might have hurt." She giggled softly as she knelt down and peered at the deep sword wound that penetrated her body's heart. The blood wasn't flowing, but there was a large pool staining the white stone. Everything in time was paused. She looked up and behind her to see Thorn standing like a statue and sneering down at her body. Mari thought she should feel rage, but instead felt mildly amused. Why shouldn't she? It was turning out to be a fantastic day, the best in her life, so to speak. "This is not going to look good on your final report, Lemuel," she said, smirking. "Cutting down a 74-year-old unarmed woman? Tisk, tisk, tisk." She looked back at her body and analyzed it. "And when did I get to be so old?" She tried to touch her wrinkled face, but her hand couldn't quite do it. She wasn't allowed back into her body, at least not this version of it. She evaluated her hair, but there wasn't a light brown strand left anywhere, even though just weeks ago she was sure there still had to be one somewhere. Mari. She stopped. The word filled her soul with more heat and light and power than anything ever had. She stood up, the sensation of weeping for joy nearly overcoming her again. She turned to the voice, and up on the hillside she saw him. Tall, dressed in white, with black hair, the perfect smile, and those amazing dark eyes. His arms were open, waiting. "Perrin!" She ran her fastest off the portico and raced for the hillside. Her feet didn't even touch the ground, nor did the presence of hundreds of frozen soldiers impede her progress. She just flew right past, and maybe even through them. His smile broadened and he opened his arms wider. "Perrin!" she cried as she rushed into them. If she'd still been in her body, it would have burst. "Mari!" he bellowed to the cosmos as he spun her around. "Yes, yes, yes!" His voice echoed everywhere, and Mari thought the neighboring stars must have turned to see where that shout came from. She didn't want to let go of him, ever. "Nor do I want to let go of you," he whispered in her ear. "Yes, I know what you're thinking. Oh, Mari!" She laughed and kissed his neck. He put her down and took her face tenderly. He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and kissed him. It was different without their bodies, but it was still bliss, pure bliss. Only after a long time did he pull away, and his grin was huge. "Not exactly the same, I know," he said, "and there are a few more limitations for now, but eventually things will be better than we remember." "It's pretty good now," she laughed and kissed him again. He wrapped his arms around her again. "Oh, Mari, how I've missed you." "And I've missed you," she whispered back. But there was something odd about that sentiment, because she felt now, here in paradise, that the dreary and depressing nearly 2 years she spent without Perrin were more like barely 2 minutes. Dismayed, she felt almost cheated for her previous loneliness, and had she only known how swiftly all that would be swept away. No, she had known. A small part of her had always understood that whatever misery she was enduring would seem but a small moment in retrospect. The writings had said so, but it was as if her physical brain couldn't fathom what her spiritual mind already knew. No wonder her feelings were often in so much conflict. But now, with the limitations of her mortal mind lifted, suddenly everything was easier. The 60 years without her father? Merely 60 minutes. Her mother? Only half an hour. She could remember the sadness, but marvelously no longer felt it. She held the memories, but none of the pain. No wonder they call this place paradise, right? Perrin said, again reading her mind. In the distance she saw them. Her parents, her in-laws, the Denzels, Calla, everyone else, smiling as they watched them embrace. Cephas nodded at his son-in-law. Then I leave her again to your care, Perrin? Although he seemed to be 100 paces away, his words sounded as if uttered just feet from them. He was close, always close, forever close. Perrin nodded back. I can take it from here, Cephas. I'll get her all caught up. See, Mari, Cephas said to his daughter, we're never more than a thought away. Mari grinned. We still have lots to talk about, Father. Yes, we do. And we will have eons to talk. But right now, we have much more pressing matters, he said, suddenly turning sober. And Mari remembered that he used to do that, shift from jovial to solemn in a half a second. The time that remains for our descendants is very, very short, and there's a great deal for us to accomplish. We're not sitting around swapping death stories, you know. He winked, his sense of humor lightening the serious moment, another of his mannerisms that she'd forgotten. We'll discuss whose death was most memorable later, but I think your argument may be the most compelling, my wonderful daughter, no matter what Ralph believes. Ralph's loud scoff, and everyone's chuckling, made Mari think this topic had been one of previous discussions. Still sober, but now with that familiar twinkle in his eyes, Cephas, the master debater, continued. While Ralph was also stabbed in the heart, he slept through the entire thing and didn't even know what happened until he woke up here with Joriana. How does that even compare? Mari laughed with everyone else while Cephas remained serious, but his smiling eyes gave him away. Then Mari realized that Ralph and Cephas had never met in the world, but clearly there was a history here, even a friendship, as Ralph gestured earnestly as if he was about to take on the debate, and Joriana dramatically covered his mouth with her hand. I was stabbed in the heart as well, you know, Ralph, and also slept through it. For now, our work continues, Cephas said, as if knowing that Mari wanted to know more about her father and in-law's relationship, but those details would have to wait. And so will your work. Should you need me or any advice, I'll just think of you, Mari said, already knowing. Cephas smiled, and suddenly everyone was gone. Perrin chuckled, apparently used to such disappearances. They loved to see the reunions. I knew they'd be here watching us. One of the many joys. Your father's duty to take care of you has never ended. Cephas is the patriarch of the family in which you were born. He's always seen to your safety and guidance. He took her face again. I'm supposed to be explaining everything to you, but instead, I just want to stare at you. She looked back into his eyes, his wonderfully dark eyes that still made her go weak in the knees that would never creak again. In a way, he was every age she remembered him. She could see all of them in his eyes, but his face was much, much younger, smooth and not a scar left. Just how old are you? She asked with a giggle. Perrin grinned. Millennia old. So are you. But that's not how you see me. Remember when you said in Idemia that you wished you could see me as an 18-year-old? He stepped back, still holding her hands. Here I am. Mari sighed and took him in. Had I seen you then? She shook her head in appreciation. He was perfect. Better than perfect, if that were possible. But I get to see you now. I can stay this way always, if you wish. She tipped her head analytically. Maybe we start with this, then age you a bit. 28 was very nice, and I really liked your 40s. And even your white hair. Wait, I just remembered. I put the lock of hair Judith cut for me in my pocket. She patted her sides futilely as Perrin tried not to snort. Realizing that her behavior was absurd, she stopped. I must have left it on my other body. He laughed. It's all right. I don't need my old white hair. You can see me at any age you wish. So why am I still seeing 18? Because you obviously like 18. Mari giggled again and glanced down at herself. She was dressed in a simple but radiant white dress, and her hands were wrinkle-free. What age am I? Perrin sighed in approval. I'm guessing 18. Really? He grinned. I rather like 18 too. But your 60s were cute as well. Silvery hair and all, he said, twisting a lock of her light brown hair. You said cute. I didn't even know you knew that word. Perrin laughed. Well, I may have said it once or twice. But we need to get back to work, my darling wife. We need to focus on our greatest duty. As long as I'm by your side, I'll do anything. And that's where you're going to stay. By my side. Mari, take a look around you. I don't think you fully appreciate yet where you are. She turned to the chaotic scene of tens of thousands of soldiers around her, suspended in their time, and sighed. Oh, Leonard's dead. She turned back to Perrin. Exactly where is he? Not here. Not in paradise with us. And that's a merciful act. His attitudes, knowledge, beliefs, all of them are exactly as they were in the world. Death doesn't change our personalities. He'd not be very comfortable in our presence, would he? Mari glanced back at his broken body, sprawled in silks on the jagged stones below. Not one bit. He seemed quite shocked to see me. You have no idea how much. Perrin chuckled mirthlessly. His spirit has gone to the dark deserts, where he will come to understand all the harm his deceit and cowardice has caused. He's made many mistakes, as we all have, but he did nothing to fix those mistakes. In fact, he frequently decided it was easier to just go with the flow instead of acting on what he knew was right. He chose to be manipulated and used, thinking that would remove the responsibility of his actions. He refused to do what was right because he never wanted anyone to not like him. Poor Leonard, Mari sighed. He had such potential. I could see it sometimes, lurking in his timid eyes. Everyone has great potential, Mari, Perrin sighed back. That's the real tragedy. Some fall far shorter of it than others. He still has a chance, though, but it's going to be a long battle. He can still fix things, but what would have taken him a year to resolve in the world may take him hundreds to accomplish in the dark deserts. The life we just left is the time to prepare to live with the Creator again. After, it's much harder. Mari turned to say something to her husband when she saw him standing behind Perrin. Young Per! She rushed to his side and looked at the frozen expression of horror on his face. Oh, Perrin, he certainly doesn't look 18. That's because he's 19. He looks more like 50, she said, trying to touch his anguished face. She could almost do it. The matter of her spirit was almost the right composition to touch the matter of his flesh. He looks so awful. Perrin put a comforting arm around her. That's because he just watched his beloved Mugga be killed by the man who tried to claim him as his son. Mari turned to Perrin. His son? I have a feeling you better start at the beginning. It's not a happy story, he warned. I can see that, but I'm also fairly confident that whatever you have to tell me won't shock me to death. I'm rather past that now. He chuckled. Yes, I have missed you. You know he was scheming with Eltana, right? Well... And so Nelt strapped him to this tree and took off with the sword. He said he'd come back to free him later, but he'll hesitate and come too late. Nelt will realize that he was tricked by us, that there are no caves, and then he'll run away before he has to face Thorn again. Lemuel will be furious to have been lied to, and will suspect it was Nelt who lied, not young Pear. After all, he still thinks he has a chance with Jatsi and young Pear. Mari may not have been able to be shocked to death, but she could still be flabbergasted. Lemuel's delusional! Not in an understandable way like John Afra, but in a bizarre, fractured way. Hey, Jatsi, I just killed your mother. That's not going to make it awkward for you to still be my queen now, is it? Perrin snorted at her imitation. Fortunately, he won't get to make that little proposal. Mari leaned against her husband. The entire time he explained young Pear's exploits, she had sat cradled in his arms, savoring the sound of his voice, watching his face move, and enjoying the intimacy of their souls next to each other. She frequently caressed his face, traced the edges of his square jaw, his straight nose, his soft earlobes. She ran her fingers through his black hair, all while he told her of the past many moons. He, too, dragged a finger across her face and lips, and occasionally paused in what he was saying to clutch her desperately and kiss her passionately. Then they'd giggle in delight at each other. He'd pick up the thread of the story again, and Mari would have to ponder the uglier, more worldly things that her grandson had suffered. Often she covered her face in sorrow, flinched in alarm, shook her head in complete bewilderment, but often just stared in surprise at the next thing young Pear did or experienced. She had a feeling Perrin left out a lot of details, especially about someone named Lolo, that young Pear encountered his first nights in Edge. So, now you know it, Perrin exhaled, stroking her hair as she laid against his chest. Well, most of it, that is. At least enough to know what he's been through and what he's thinking now. I understand, and I thank you for your editing, she said, running her hand over his broad shoulder. Whatever you do, don't ever tell the details to Lilla. I can't believe he's made it back. Perrin sighed. Young Pear vacillates between two worlds, the one he grew up with in Salem and the one the Refuser controls in the world. So many times he's come close to grasping onto Salem, but then is pulled away by the ideas of the world. But since he's been coming home, his grip on Salem is stronger, except for right now. Yes, wanting to kill Lemuel is a bit of a worldly thought, she decided as she drew a line down his bulky arm. But his purpose for doing so has improved, Perrin said. He doesn't want Lemuel to harm his family. Mari, 3 weeks ago, as he lay on the floor above the dungeon, he was ready to die to make sure his family survives. That's got to count for something, right? Perrin smiled. His heart's getting in the right place, but his pride is still too strong. What he needs most of all is the understanding that he can't control all of this. He still believes he's entirely reliant on himself, and he hasn't accepted that the Creator is in charge, and that whatever he decides is what should happen. Seeing me die could do a lot in that direction, she said, staring at her grandson still poised in time. That's what we're hoping. Something has to break him, bring him to his knees. Mari glanced at his leg. That won't happen literally while he's still bound by his thigh to the tree. That will give in time. He needs to be broken like you were, doesn't he? Mari said gently. They rarely spoke of his past. It was in the past. But Perrin also had a great deal of experience, which he needed to draw upon to help their grandson come as far as his grandfather. Perrin nodded sadly. Hogel made a great deal of progress with me at young Pear's age, but the trauma of watching you die over and over in my dreams is what got me the rest of the way. I finally had to surrender my sense of control and turn it all over to him. I couldn't control the world or my life or even what happened in my dreams. I had to rely on the Creator. Self-reliance is an illusion that makes us so confident in ourselves that we're confident we don't even need Him. Once I got over that arrogance, every trial was far easier to endure. Mari snuggled closer to him, and he wrapped his arms tighter around her. I'm sorry you had to witness my deaths, all of them. The real one wasn't that bad, actually. Being stabbed in the heart is quite quick. Makes a bit of a mess, but now that I look at it from this side, it's nothing more than a spider bite. Perrin chuckled and kissed the top of her head. Looked quite gruesome. Even I flinched when he hit the stone floor, although I knew you were already gone. Was your death harder? She asked. He thought for a moment. Yes, I suppose. Physically, it was painful, but it was the emotional part that was excruciating. I knew it was coming for some time, and knowing for those days that I was leaving you, I thought saying goodbye that last day would break my heart. Nearly broke mine, she murmured. I know. I was with you right after I went, but your heart was so tender and fragile, you couldn't feel me. He gripped her firmer, as if to hug away those miserable memories, and she let him. But as for the pain, he said, death was a sweet and welcome relief. He smiled and sighed in contentment. Dying was miraculous to have it all over. The final, great, hoped-for miracle. It sounds strange, but I can't describe it in any other way. To be released from all that physical and mental torment, then to arrive here and meet again all of our family and friends, oh, truly glorious, just like today. He kissed her again, and she let him. You know, he continued in a more casual tone, I could have gone later, but I just decided to get it over with. It was such a pleasant afternoon and evening anyway, the day of my death, and everyone in Salem could come by and see my body. Suddenly she realized something, and she sat up to look at him properly. So you did plan it that way. I've always got a plan, Mari, he smiled slyly. Why didn't you tell me that you were going to die that day? He tilted his head. And what would you have done if I had told you? Mari paused, then said resignedly, talk you out of it, beg you to stay. That's what I thought, he said, as he ran his fingers through her hair, gathering it behind her. The next day was much hotter. Then the thunderstorms came. It wouldn't have been a good time to have a few thousand people in the orchard then. She chuckled. You're right. I always love it when you admit that. Perrin nodded at young Per, still anguished and frozen in time. Mari, I think you're ready. Once we go back to his time, we'll feel things at the same rate that he does. It's best that we stay with him in order to remain focused. As you can see, it's far more enjoyable to just sit and hold each other for hours on end. But that's not our calling. We've been sitting here for hours? Closer to a full day, relatively speaking, he said, kissing her again, and once more. If time were measured for us. But everyone has this before they get to work. The adjustment and education period. Consider it an extended midday meal break, granted by the Creator. She giggled and sat up, then considered what he had said. When will I see him? She asked quietly. Perrin's face went soft. At the end of 1,000 years, all of us will kneel before him to be judged, to see who is ready to remain with him and who isn't. Until then, the test continues in another form. You still feel him, right? Mari nodded. Most intensely. And it's from him that all of this understanding comes from, right? Her mind was clear and open, more so than it had ever been. Not only did she hear about young Per, she saw it, all of it, playing out in her mind as if she were with him. It seemed that so much information was hovering around her, waiting patiently for the right moments to make itself manifest to her. Perrin smiled. And more knowledge will flow into you as you're ready for it. You're not yet prepared to kneel in his presence, but you will be soon. Have you? Mari whispered. Perrin's eyes became even softer. I have, Mari. I had to be here for a while to adjust first before I could see him. But then, his chin trembled. Fantastic, glorious, overwhelming even in this form. And Mari, I remembered him. He was so familiar, more familiar than my own father's face. I wasn't allowed to remember him until then. She thought she already knew so much, but there was still more? Why can't I see him now, just for a moment? Because you won't want to leave his side, he told her longingly. You'll want to sit and tell him everything, like you're 5 years old again, and just have the most amazing adventure. It's too wonderful, Mari. She could feel that it was, and couldn't speak in anticipation of the reunion. How she felt being with her parents and Perrin were already so much, but even more? It will happen very soon, he assured her. Right now, the last day is nearly upon us, and there's so much work to do. You once said to young Per that I wasn't sitting on a cloud, strumming some tuneless harp, pretending to sing, and you're right. We don't rest. We keep working, day and night, tirelessly, to get everyone where they need to be. You just came from that life, so you're very much in tune with it. You need to stay in that realm in order to provide the best direction. I see that, she said, feeling nostalgia for an experience she couldn't yet remember. I can't run home and tell Papa what I've been up to because there's still more to do. He smiled. That's right. But you'll feel him and hear him. You're getting better at it already. He hesitated because Mari had a peculiar expression on her face. She was remembering something. More of the veil was slipping away, revealing another memory. I asked to do this today, she said softly, astonished. Perrin began to smile. You remember that already? She barely heard him, because the image was so clear in her mind. A discussion, long, long ago. Hundreds, probably thousands of years ago. But time wasn't measured, so that wasn't quite right. But there was a discussion, a debate about their existence on this sphere and how it would be, should be. The refuser had debated against them, not agreeing with the Creator how it should go. They all took sides, and more sided with the Creator than with the rebellious son. The refuser had left, furious that his plans were rejected, and many others followed him. And then the debate resumed, this time about who was willing to do what, and when, and how. The Creator had called for volunteers, needing some of them to give up something very important, to make sacrifices willingly, to give up the very lives that they were so eager to get. I asked to do this today, Mari whispered again. She couldn't quite see it yet in her memory, but she remembered going to the Creator, declaring that she wanted to make the sacrifice, wait until the right moment, do what was required to help her brothers and sisters, even if it was scary. And he agreed, she recalled. I made him promise that I could do this, and I insisted that he not let me forget. He sent me little reminders, didn't he? Every time I read that passage in the writings, something prickled in my memory, something distant. I couldn't remember much at all, but those words about the aged before the last day, they always meant something. But until last night, I didn't understand why. Last night, he gave me enough to remember. I had insisted long ago that he give me those clues," she exclaimed. "Oh, Perrin, I prayed after you died that I could die too, but the Creator didn't give in because he was honoring something I had asked for much, much longer ago." Perrin smiled. "That's why I couldn't come get you after I died. I remembered then, too, that you wanted to be the means of helping others escape. Right after I came to paradise, not only did I foresee your sacrifice today, I also remembered that conversation you had with our Creator. I was there too. A few of us had gone with you because you wanted us to help you remember your decision once we got to that life. Not that I ever did remember," he added apologetically. She met his eyes. "Shem was there, with us. He was one of those who promised to help me do this. And in the end, he's the one who actually did. Oh, Perrin, he has no idea, does he? He always does the right things." "Speaking of doing the right things," she continued, her tone shifting, "there were a lot of things I wanted to accomplish in my life." She searched the immense memory she could access, but not all of it was available yet. "I missed a few things," she murmured regretfully. But overall, I did nearly everything." She knew inherently that once the last day was over, she'd have the opportunity to recall all of her life, to reflect on what she did and didn't do. She was sure there was a list she'd created, and it would manifest itself into her hands, and she'd review it, remembering what she'd written so long ago, all of her goals and plans and desires for her life in her body. But for now, her Creator wanted her to understand one thing from that list, the most important thing she wanted to accomplish, and she had done it today. In her mind formed the words she heard Cephas say when she first arrived in paradise, but now they came from the Creator. "Well done, my faithful daughter." She closed her eyes in satisfaction, in joy. Looking back on it, meeting Lemuel at the temple and dying really wasn't such a big sacrifice. Not one bit. Look where it got her. Home. Perrin squeezed her. "I felt the same way," he whispered. "Everything I did or endured or suffered in life wasn't such a big deal once I came back here. Like a child who's skinned his knee and is consumed by the pain, sure that all in the world there's no bigger agony. And then, not so much later, he's off again, happily playing. Life is brief, and so is its pain." Pain! Mari glanced up and saw young Pear's face, consumed with it. In such a short time he'd forget how terrible it was, she knew. Before the interval between then and now, he needed help. And she had insisted long ago on providing that, too. Perrin noticed her staring at young Pear. "If you're ready." Mari extracted herself from her husband and stood up. Perrin got up too. Cuddling and chatting endlessly would resume later. There was work to do. As Mari gazed at young Pear's agonized expression, she was more than ready to see it change. "Will he hear me?" "I don't know," Perrin said. "He was extraordinarily in tune with me. We had hours-long conversations in the dungeon. He was even closer to you, so he should hear you, if he's listening." "So it's easy to ignore us?" "Very. Takes no effort at all to stop listening. One more thing. Put your hand on his chest, just above his heart." She stepped closer and did so. Surprised to feel something so distinctly, she gasped, "What is this? It's so cold and hard." "That's his soul," Perrin told her. "You can reach him there, but only if he wants to be reached. That's where I felt my parents touching me after they died." Mari nodded. I felt you there often too at the beginning. Perrin put his hand on top of hers. His anger has done this. There were times he was so soft and pliable. We need to get him back to that in order for him to make it on time. And just how much time is left, she wondered. Perrin looked at her. She saw it. Everything that would transpire in the future. Wow, how'd you do that? He smiled. I didn't. Already you're realizing how to properly use your mind, to let the Creator pour pure knowledge into you. You asked, He gave you the answer. Ready? She nodded and kept her hand in place, Perrin's firmly on top of hers. Suddenly, young Per lunged, pulling at the tree like a ferocious dog. No, no, Mugga, he screamed. I'm right here, young Per. Feel me, it's all right. In fact, it's wonderful. Okay, so I'm ending now. Author's note, I am ending now, because that was a very long chapter. But I'm going to tell you something about this chapter. So this is not in the book anywhere, but I'm going to tell you this. I've been waiting for many, many years to tell you this. Over 20 years ago, I lived in rural Virginia in a little town called Buena Vista. That's right, called Buena Vista. And it was probably 2002, 2003. And I was in our backyard. It was on a sloping hill that went down to a river called the Maury River. There you go. Spelled differently, though. And I was hacking away at these thorny vines. Thorns, okay? And I was hacking them away and ripping them out, and it was taking a long time to do it. And, you know, your mind wanders when you're doing kind of a repetitive task over and over. And as I'm hacking at those weeds and those thorns, something came to my mind. And it was of a temple, and it was white. And there were these columns in front of it, and I saw this little old woman standing at the front of the temple. And I think I stopped hacking the bushes at that point because I was just so focused on this old woman and this white temple. And then I saw in front of her this huge field of blue soldiers, just thousands and thousands of soldiers. And I could tell this woman was in trouble. These soldiers were coming for her. And she stood there, just bravely, solid. And I thought, why is she standing there? Because she knew her grandson was among those soldiers. And she was standing there for him. And this image was so powerful in my head. And I knew she was unarmed. For a moment she was armed, but then she wasn't. And I knew all the soldiers were coming, and her grandson was there wondering why she was doing this. He recognized her, and he was trying to figure out what she was doing. That is the very first image of this entire book series that came to my head. And I wondered for a few years who she was and what was going on. And it wasn't until some years later that we moved to Utah. And I'm driving down a canyon. It's called Sardine Canyon. And I'm driving down the canyon with my family. And we're heading to a city called Brigham City. And I'm looking at the mouth of the canyon, and it kind of starts to open up. And I thought, I need to start writing her story now. And it was going to be a short story. Ha! It was going to be a short story. And I just, her image, and this was like 4 or 5 years later, I still could see this. And I said, I'm going to write a short story. So I started writing that short story that summer, thought I'd be done in the summer. By the end of the summer, I had over 100 pages. And at the end of those 100 pages, I thought, I think this woman who I named Maury after the river, I think this woman has a husband. No idea what his name is. And he has a captain. And the captain's going to cause them problems. And so I took that first 100 pages and I tossed it and I started all over. And then the whole story started coming. So anyway, I have just feel like I've made this huge circle. I write about how Maury felt that when she read those lines from the writings that she could reach out and touch her younger self and tap her on the shoulder, I feel like I'm tapping myself back in 2002. I'm tapping myself on the shoulder and I'm saying, I wrote her story and now I've just told everybody about it. And I feel a tapping on my shoulder. 20 years from now, wherever I am, I'm tapping my shoulder right now saying, guess what? Guess where we are right now? I have no idea. I'm reading this to you from Florida. I'm not staying in Florida. I know that already. I have no idea where I'm going to be 20 years from now. But I'm tapping my shoulder, and I can't wait to see where that circle takes me. So, anyway, this was fun. Thanks, guys. I'll do the next chapter hopefully soon. Oh, I got to do my end off. This has been Chapter 5, the 34th day of planting. Oh my gosh, start it again. Okay. This has been, you don't realize how much I edit. I'm not going to edit any of this out just so you can hear how ridiculous I sometimes am. Okay. This is Chapter 5, the 34th day of planting. I've lost my notes. Part 9 of 12. Thank you. I'm so bad at this.